Good afternoon, hello, and welcome to Paul's Garden Gab. We're in my garden once again today on a very, very wet day in Neilston, I must say. I don't know if you can hear the rain. You can probably just make out some of the raindrops that are falling. I have put a brolly over my guests, so I'm hoping that protects them from the rain slightly. But thank you if you're joining us live on Facebook. Today I'm joined by Blair McDougall, who has very kindly agreed to come and be my guest on the Garden Gab. Blair's probably a man who needs little or no introduction. Blair I've known for a long time, since I was a teenager, I think, Blair, wasn't I? Probably just a boy when I first got to know you.
And short trousers.
And obviously Blair's worked for a number of years for the Labour Party and indeed in a number of government roles when Labour were in power. He ran Better Together, which was the No campaign in the referendum in 2014, and since then has been involved in a number of different roles, kind of building democracy and things, I guess, in other countries. So hello, Blair, really good to have you with us.
Good to be here.
And do you maybe want to just say a bit about, because you're a local boy as well, you're East Wren, kind of born and bred, so do you want to say a wee bit about where you're from and that sort of thing?
So I grew up in Thornley Bank, immediately opposite the McDonald's. In Thornley Bank, which was great because it was immediately opposite my primary school. And it probably cultivated a lifelong tardiness because I would basically run out the house when the school bell went and try to get across the road. So grew up there and really kind of got invested in politics in Eastwood as it was and East Wren as it is now.
Yeah, absolutely. And I suppose, because you and I are quite similar in that vein, so started to really become politically active in a local way. Obviously, thinking about, you, for example, local councillors, Jim Fletcher, who's the provost now. Jim,
first politician I ever met.
Yeah, exactly. Jim's represented that ward for a long time. But these folk, I guess, were really good kind of shining examples for us in those days.
No, absolutely. And I think there's a responsibility when you're a politician. And I think about Jim Fletcher, a local Labour councillor. I also think about Alan Steele, Lib Dem provost, who you would see at your primary school. And obviously Jim's now the provost. And if your first interaction with a politician is that they're a bit of an asshole, then that colours things for the rest of your life. And I think we were probably both lucky in the politicians we met earlier on, that there were people who we thought, that's a job that you can actually do something good with,
To any constituents who are watching, I hope you don't think that I am what Blair just said, and that actually I'm an okay guy. So, if you're just joining us on Paul's Garden Gab with Blair McDougall in a very rainy Neilston, and we're going to be chatting about what Blair's been doing during COVID-19, and also get some of his thoughts on the kind of national picture, and also what he hopes, I guess, for the future, and what he wants to see happen as we move out of this kind of crisis. So Blair, you and I have been chatting over COVID as well, because I know that you've been doing some work locally, some volunteering work and bringing some people together. What was your kind of motivation for doing that? I guess, what did you first think when you heard that lockdown was coming in and stuff like that?
My first thought was probably that my work diary was about to become empty. For my own mental health, I needed to be doing something. But also, I've always been someone who likes a crisis, and I feel I work better in a crisis. And it seemed to me that there was a need to organise communities, and that's what I've always done. So I think those of us who for whom organising something at a community level is kind of second nature, there's kind of responsibility to do something. I was kind of half joking in social media that both governments should have sort of contracted out the response at a community level to COVID to organisers from political parties, because we know how to go door to door, we know how to deal with data, we know how to get volunteers, we know how to get a leaflet run together,
Absolutely.
So, and that's essentially what we did.
And it's funny, so many people have spoken to me about the same sort of skills that are involved between organising politically and organising this. Actually, I was talking to some people the other day who said they've been working so intensely and so hard they feel like it's been a general election campaign, and they've come to the end of it, but actually in some ways we're not even at the end of it, and there's kind of no result, so you don't know what's going to happen. And I suppose that's the difference, isn't it?
No, it totally is. So we organised our wee kind of mutual assistance group covering Newton Mearns via WhatsApp groups that parents had for classes. We basically just put out a notice saying we're setting up this group. It's going to be delivering, food or medicine to elderly people or people who are shielding. And I think within 48 hours, we had 200 people signed up as volunteers. And you talk about election organising. When you're organising an election, the thing that holds you back often is people don't have the time and people don't have the motivation. Everyone had both of those things.
Absolutely.
People were furloughed, people were at home, and suddenly people had the ability to get involved. I wish local organising, in an election was as easy as it is during a pandemic.
Yeah. So, hello to everyone who's joining. We're getting a couple of comments in now. Some hellos. Hi to Ashley. Tony Lawler watching from Paisley as well, and Will Little there. And Martin saying we need a bigger brawly. I don't know if you're commenting, Martin, on Blair. He needs a bigger. This big presence needs a bigger brawly. Is that what you're saying, Martin? We'll get you for that, definitely.
My olive green trousers are turning khaki as the minutes go by.
Such is the dedication to Paul's Garden Gab that Blair is sitting here in the rain. So we're just hearing a wee bit about what Blair's been doing in the community to organise, and it's been a fantastic response across East Renfrewshire and across the country. What was the reaction like from your volunteers? I mean, were they people who'd volunteered before, or were they quite new to it?
I don't know, to be honest. My sense is that most of them were people who were, just parents and first rather than kind of activists. We had people from other political parties getting involved, which was kind of nice. And it wasn't, done in any way politically. But the thing I found remarkable was we organised ourselves around this WhatsApp group. We had the entire community leafleted within a couple of days, within 2 or 3 days. And when requests started to come through from people saying I need a prescription picked up or could someone do some messages for me, within 60 seconds every time I put out a request, it was taken.
Yeah.
Which is remarkable, and it kind of shows that for all the talk of kind of apathy and people being kind of society being more atomised and all the rest of it, if you give people the opportunity, they actually do care about each other and they do want to help each other. So it was pretty inspiring.
Yeah, and what was the response like on those who, I guess, were on the receiving end of the support, so those who were shielding or those who needed that wee bit of assistance? What was the reaction like?
Just grateful. One of the really nice things I hope that's happened is we tried to, when someone from Main Street asked for some help, we would try and find someone in Main Street to help them. And I think one of the nice side effects of the kind of emergency response is you've now got people linked to that elderly person in their street who maybe needs help over the long term. So I think it's maybe building, I hope, kind of social capital for the long term as well.
I think most of my guests and kind of just me personally, what we've been seeing, I think, is just that people who didn't know their neighbours beforehand are now starting to kind of talk to their neighbours in a way that they hadn't. I think you're right. People are maybe looking in on that elderly person that they maybe just know of but don't know in a personal way. And I think it's been great to see that. And I just hope that we can continue that going forward. Absolutely. Yeah. And what's your kind of sense of, East Ren, great place to live, great place to bring up a family. What's your sense been of the kind of support that's come from places like Voluntary Action and the council and stuff like that?
So I think it's been good in the sense that you link together with there's clear signposting that if you need help, give us a call. My sense is from, and this isn't specific to East Renfrewshire, I think it's true more generally, that the response from the existing voluntary sector to all of these mutual assistance groups was maybe quite cautious at first, because understandably when you're running something which is permanent, you're thinking about safeguarding, you're thinking about data protection and all the rest of it. The way we organised didn't involve concerns about data, because we weren't collecting people's data. We were saying to people, delete that person's address from your phone once you're finished and things like that. And I think there's maybe a lesson to look back on this about, is the orientation of how we do voluntary action at the moment focused towards encouraging people to be active, or is it too much oriented towards just caution and all the rest of it? And I think the protection side of it is really important, but it's got to be done in a way that doesn't scare off people, because if I hadn't spent years election campaigning and understanding data protection and how to work with volunteers and all that kind of stuff, I might have been put off. I might have been kind of slightly frightened by that side of things, and it might have stopped me doing stuff. You know?
And then it becomes almost less organic, doesn't it? Because
Totally.
people feel no, absolutely.
Yeah.
Hello to anyone joining us here on the Garden Gab. We're in a very wet Neilston today with Blair McDougall, having a good chat about COVID-19 and what's been going on in his part of the world and his views essentially on what's happening. You know, we're talking a lot about community there, Blair, and in June we always come together to honour a good friend of yours who was tragically murdered, Joe Cox, and we have a great get-together usually. We weren't able to do it in the same way this year, mainly because of the social distancing. But, you know, Joe's message and the message that's come out of her tragic death was about communities coming together and showing that we have more in common. Have you seen that at the heart of this as well?
Yeah, as I say, the people of all politics and no politics getting involved, not just my group, I think in every group. You see Labour councillors running food delivery services with SNP councillors side by side. I think that's kind of healthy. I think part of modern politics is you're in your kind of trench over here and they're in their trench, and you kind of shell each other at distance via social media, and you never actually spend much time talking to each other. And remembering that actually, although you might disagree about 25% of stuff, there is a core of kind of shared interest, you know.
Absolutely, and I think that's certainly been our mission in the council. And I know that Labour as an opposition has set out, and I spoke to Ian Murray about this when he was on the Garden Gab, and I know that Keir Starmer's been really keen on this, and it's about saying we want to support the government when it gets it right, and we want them to succeed in this battle that we're in against COVID, but also we're responsible to kind of challenge them when they get it wrong. And I suppose that's been certainly the picture for me of the last few weeks. I mean, how have you felt? I mean, as I say, you've done jobs in government. You've been there as a civil servant and as an advisor and had to support ministers in their decision making. I mean, what's been your sense of both the government reaction at the UK level and at the Scottish level?
So I think on some levels, both governments have been impressive. So I think the UK government's economic response initially commands consensus. You know, the idea that I think in East Renfrewshire about a third of people who weren't previously reliant on kind of state for their income are on either the self-employed or the furlough scheme, and that's remarkable. And that, you're talking about my time in government, that's kind of the Treasury at its best, the ability to do these and implement these huge projects. Similarly, I think in Scotland, you know, the initial response in terms of getting more capacity into the NHS is really, really good. My criticism of both governments is kind of about imagination. So I think we saw over the last few weeks a rouse about the schools. There wasn't the feeling of the same national effort to get schools back. As it happens, we've ended up, hopefully, in that position in August anyway. But I think right across government, this should be a moment where you look for what is possible rather than accept the reasons why action can't happen. And I feel both governments are maybe just lacking a bit of imagination. And I think that question of imagination, about imagining what is possible going forward, is going to be the kind of the big question of politics in the next few years.
Absolutely. Welcome to anyone joining us. We're getting some comments in now as well. So Ashley Pragnell is sharing that COVID has to be above party politics, except for challenging, you know, where policies may be a bit suspect. I think that's a great point, Ashley, and it's certainly something that we would both agree with. And I think what we've seen actually, as Blair's alluded to already today, is people coming together to really make the change, I guess. But, you know, you've mentioned the schools, Blair. I mean, what kind of domestically for us, we've seen a bit of a furore this week over the border and over kind of the outbreak that happened in Dumfries and closing the border, and I started getting bogged down, I guess, in a debate that actually I found quite depressing. And you've been in the middle of these debates, you know, for a long time, and obviously because of your role within the referendum. I mean, what was your sense of that debate this week and where it went?
It felt like two people who, the two people being the First Minister and the Prime Minister, are kind of in a symbiotic relationship with each other. They need to fight each other. and they're fighting over something that they've got no intention of doing. They've got no intention of doing. And one of the remarkable things about that because yesterday that row about the border, is the First Minister stoking this row in a press conference where they're acknowledging that there is a cross-border outbreak where people who work in Dumfries and Galloway but maybe live in Carlisle, and people who live in work in Carlisle but live in Dumfries and Galloway are spreading the disease to each other. That's not going to stop. People aren't going to stop going to the shops in Carlisle if they live near the border. People aren't going to stop going to their job if they're an essential worker. And I understand one of the people in the outbreak was working at the hospital in Carlisle. That's not going to stop. Mm-hmm. And rather than sliding back into this frame where the distinctions and the difference that matters is between Scotland and England, in this it's localised lockdowns. It's more granular than this old argument. And maybe that was just a kind of skirmish, but I would worry if our remaining response to the virus, but also our response to the post-virus kind of economic challenge, just returns to those old arguments, because it's there is an opportunity to think a bit bigger and be a bit more imaginative.
I think there's a sense out there that we need to get away from those arguments and really focus on what is the recovery going to be. So how are we going to support one another, and how are the two governments going to work together? That's the key. And we saw again Ian Murray as Shadow Secretary of State making those points in the House of Commons this week. You need to get on and you need to work to make the changes, both with the economic power of the UK and the domestic agenda here in Scotland. But I suppose coming on to that idea about the recovery, where we are at the moment is we're looking to getting schools back in August. We've seen shops reopen this week. We're seeing potentially beer gardens. I mean, I don't know if anyone's going to sit in a beer garden right enough in this weather. You need a better brolly than that, certainly. But what we're about to see is a reopening of the economy. Yeah. I mean, what's your sense about what fundamentally needs to change as we move forward? What do we need to learn from this?
Let me talk about the government response in a second. I think at a kind of at a societal level, we decided at the start of this as a society, at a community level, at a neighbourhood level, that it wasn't acceptable for these old people who couldn't leave their home to be abandoned. So people self-organised, some support, from government at a local and national level, but really people took the onus in that. Those people were lonely before. Those people were isolated before. We need to ask ourselves why we didn't do that before. Mm-hmm. And that's not a political question, it's a question for all of us. There's an age concern survey that they did where they found that 1 million pensioners say that their television is their main source of company. Right? So why was it we all cared about that in that moment of crisis? And why will we all probably withdraw from doing that, notwithstanding some of the relationships that have been built? Similarly, we decided it wasn't acceptable for homeless people to die of COVID, so we put them in hotels. Why is it acceptable the rest of the time for them to die of overdoses or of a cold or of violence or of all the other risks that people in the streets face? And of course, when it came to job losses, we decided, and there's a consensus across parties, that it wasn't acceptable if someone lost their job, that they should dramatically lose their income. So we had the furlough scheme, we had the self-employment scheme. But every year, hundreds of thousands of people lose their jobs, and their income does collapse. And I think there's a question is why that I don't really know the answer to, which is why, when there's a crisis, do we care about these things? Why are we able to come together when there's a crisis to tackle these big problems, but we're not in kind of peacetime, if you like, I think that's a kind of bigger question for that we should all be asking.
Yeah, and I think almost that sense that the responses you see, it's a bit like going back to the kind of mobilisation we saw around the NHS, but also I think people wanting to do something, wanting to volunteer, wanting to go out on their front door and clap on a Thursday, wanting to kind of show support. Yeah. How have we shown support as a society, I guess, in the normal times, as you say? Yeah, so
there's a question for society. There's also a question in there for government about imagination. So I remember when I was in Rwanda, I worked in Rwanda as a governance advisor, And when I was there, they had a pledge for universal free primary education, supported by international donors. And to meet that, they had to build 3,000 classrooms in 1 year because of population growth.
Mm-hmm.
So the government bought the corrugated iron, the rebar rods, the cement, and then they mobilised the whole country to make bricks. Right? So you saw people outside of the road, making bricks to build their own children's schools. And that really stuck with me. If a country that has, so the Ministry of Education in Rwanda, I think, had 20 employees or something, and that's if you count like the guy at the gate. They were able to do that in a year because they had the political imagination. And I think, as I say, I think the thing I hope comes out of this crisis is politicians asking why not more, and just raising those ambitions a little bit more. Because I think where politicians have failed in the crisis is because they haven't had that imagination, because they have been in the pre-crisis mindset, where you worry more about the process than the outcome.
Absolutely. If you're just joining us, welcome to Paul's Garden Gab. It's chucking it down here in Neilston. We've lost the sunshine. I mean, Blair has come just at the point where the sun's gone away. It's terrible, but we're joined by Blair McDougall, and we're just chatting about Blair's experience of COVID and some of his ideas in terms of the recovery. We've got a couple of comments there. One about small business, which I think is really important because small businesses have been at the heart of bearing the brunt of a lot of this and will be key to the recovery. And something there I think about the free TV licences for elderly and some of the decisions that the current Conservative government's made. I suppose it's almost like some of those decisions and the austerity we've seen is now coming home to roost in a certain way. And
we were less prepared than we could have been. Yeah.
And we need to think about how we grow our way out of that. And I think things like looking again at how do we treat the elderly and how do we support our pensioners.
Yeah.
The thing with small businesses, I mean, I don't know if you find this where you are in Newton Mearns, but certainly our local businesses here in Neilston have been just key to people keeping going.
Yeah.
And whether that's been the paper shop who's doing milk and bread deliveries for people, or whether it's been the local takeaway, because you can't have a lot of treats, I guess, during a lockdown situation, but the local takeaways are kind of been at the heart of that. So have you found in your community that's been true as well?
I think that's absolutely true. And I think there's so my local bakery, Newlands Home Bakery, reopened, and there's quite big queues outside because people missed it. And people have a great deal of affection for those local businesses. The businesses I think about, so my kids go to a Taekwondo class, right? We pay a direct debit for that every month. Loads of parents, understandably, will have cancelled their direct debit.
Yeah.
Will they go back to that business? Will that business maybe have lost half of its income? And I think when we're thinking about these small businesses, there are the ones with premises that if we see shuttered, we understand and we can kind of see, we can understand it because we can see it.
Mm-hmm.
But all over the country, there are people who are self-employed who are just in desperate situations, and it won't improve just because the lockdown reopens, because they will have lost so much of their customer base. They'll be starting from much further back.
And I think because of that phased approach to what sectors can open when, that's going to be a challenge, particularly for people who may be in the building trade or can't get the same level of work they would have got. I mean, obviously the government made an intervention for self-employed and for businesses after some pressure, I think, to really extend that scheme. But what do you think needs to happen as we move into recovery? What can we do on a practical level to support those businesses?
So I think there are several things. The starting point for what we do with recovery has to be to understand that whatever happens, the size of the state's going to increase. Right? It's either going to increase if we step back the measures that we've taken so far. The size of the state will increase because of what economists talk about as automatic stabilisers. So more people go on an unemployment benefit, people's incomes will reduce, and more people will need tax credits and that sort of thing. And you'll then find the government needing to spend more money on stimulus to try and turn that around. That to me is the negative idea of how the size of the state increases. you talked about my time in government. When I was in, I was in the Department for Culture, Media and Sport, the most fun political advisor job in government.
Yeah, I can imagine. And an industry at the moment that's really putting the pressure on.
Really under pressure. And overnight, because Peter Hain resigned, we got moved to the Department of Work and Pensions in the middle of biggest economic crisis.
Generation.
But that was 10 years ago, and one day we were called into the Treasury and we were told we want to spend billions of pounds on active labour market policies. So that is to say, rather than helping individuals to get skills so that they can then go into the labour market and find jobs, you actually invest to try and create the jobs. You're trying to increase the supply of jobs. And we created a thing then called the Future Jobs Fund, which was where companies, local authorities, whoever could bid for funding to create a new job. And it worked, but importantly, it didn't just work because it improved the outcomes for the individuals. So individuals, I think, were like 11% more likely to be in unsupported, that's to say, unsubsidised employment after a few years. It also saved the state money because people weren't falling into long-term unemployment. People were getting skills, and it was pumping money back into the wider economy. So we know what works. One of the first things the Conservatives did when they came in was to get rid of the Future Jobs Fund, which was I think short-sighted. Similarly, if we've got local lockdowns, we need local furlough schemes. You can't have the logic which says a national lockdown only works if employers are able to keep workers at home and able to shut down their businesses. That must be true for localised lockdowns going forward as well. And the third thing I have in my head is, and thinking about businesses like Braehead down the road, see Café Rouge this week. Lots of businesses have lots of debt, and for them to survive, government is going to have to take a stake in that debt. It's going to have to recapitalise these institutions, these companies. And the Chancellor is talking, it goes back to what I was saying about going back into kind of old language. The Chancellor is talking about, I don't want to pick winners. This isn't normal times. We're not talking about opening tractor factories owned by the state. We're talking about making strategic interventions to make sure that companies that employ tens of thousands of people don't go under. And that might mean for a sustained period of time that the government has a stake in these companies, but the alternative is that people suffer.
Absolutely. And we were talking when Ian Murray was on as well about, in this area, in this community and beyond in the West, the challenge that we have is Glasgow Airport jobs are going, jobs at Braehead are going potentially. We have a massive issue at Rolls-Royce and in Shannon, which is really concerning. And when Ian and I were chatting, it's about trying to protect these centres, if you like, these employment skills centres where people have great opportunities in terms of even apprenticeships and learning a trade. If you lose that plant, that centre, then it goes forever. And I think the government have to understand that they need to intervene to just keep that presence as well and keep those high-skilled jobs.
Economic failure costs you money. Either costs you money up front or it costs you money on a longer tail. And if you intervene early and you prevent that mass unemployment, and particularly you prevent long-term unemployment, then you save yourself money in the long run. If you take the view that it's sink or swim, then you end up costing the taxpayer more money and unemployment benefit and all the social problems that come further in line. Now, in fairness to where we are in the political debate at the moment, I think there is a potential for a kind of new political consensus around state intervention. I don't believe the Tories are going to completely withdraw it, but you can tell from their language that their instinct is to be deeply uncomfortable. Now, if you're from the right, you would think, well, maybe it's right that the government should be deeply uncomfortable. But I think we're some distance away from a kind of phase in this crisis where you should start worrying about that. I think we should be. There are immediate problems to think about.
It's funny because we were chatting a bit about this. Things like a car scrappage scheme, which was obviously a policy that you knew well in your time in the end days of the Brown government. it got kind of ridiculed at the time, but actually now it's coming back, and it's coming back into vogue because it makes sense to try and stimulate that part of the economy.
But it's also green.
Well, exactly, old cars, yeah. So people are starting to realise that we are going to have to rethink those traditional lines, those dividing lines left and right, to some extent,
But also, there's on one level, this for as Labour people, this is a hypothetical conversation because we're 4 years away from getting back into government potentially. But there is a real question within this because Boris Johnson came into power defining himself against Theresa May, David Cameron, George Osborne, right? So his political instincts are not to repeat what's gone before. So if we can make a popular argument about the need for these interventions rather than returning to austerity, we can actually win that argument because to return to those old policies would be Boris Johnson kind of going back into something which he himself has kind of tried to define as a failure.
So hello, if you're just joining us. I see a few more folk coming on to the Garden Gab with myself, Paul O'Kane, and joined by Blair McDougall today, just chatting about COVID-19 and the response. We had a question flash up there, Blair, which I think is quite relevant to what we've just been talking about, which is about the Labour Party. And you and I both Labour Party members, and we've both done our 10,000 hours, I think, roughly, in the Labour Party. You maybe slightly more than me. But the question, I think, was particularly about the Labour Party in Scotland, because I think we have been down on our luck, and it's been a big challenge over the last few years, particularly. I mean, what's your sense of where we need to go going into an election next year? And you talked about the ambition, I think, that's lacking in the Scottish Government at this moment, facing this crisis. But what does Labour need to do?
So, I say all of this in the self-awareness that I have run election campaigns where we've got gubbed, partly to do with circumstance, but I'll just caveat what I say about that. I think we need to argue for what we believe in is the first and most important thing. We continually get wrapped around the axle of the nationalist message. So I remember I had an argument with someone, and it was about the Tories' hostile environment policy, and a nationalist said to me, "Oh well, if only we'd voted for independence, we wouldn't be part of that." And my first instinct was to say, "Well, actually, the white paper had a points-based system in it," and I thought, "Well, hang on, no. What are the values argument underneath this?" And so my response instead was, "How would independence help the Windrush generation in London who are being persecuted?" And it won't. And I think we need to go back to the values of what we believe in. We need to go back to the idea that we do believe that morality isn't something that stops at a border, that we have a moral responsibility to people outside the borders. That we do believe that policy is something that has to be debated, and it has to be debated about values and outcomes. Does this policy meet our values? Does it meet our outcomes? And at the moment, again, about getting wrapped around the nationalist axle, we have allowed independence and the constitutional question more generally to be invested with magical powers. Nationalists will say, well, we've got the choice to have different policy, instead of asking, well, will that actually be possible? Will that actually be deliverable? What are the choices within Scotland in terms of who gets resources and why, rather than the choices being between Scotland and our neighbours? So I think the first and most important thing is to stop stepping inside nationalist arguments and argue passionately for what we believe in. Because the nationalists lost so many elections, and they didn't think to themselves, let's pack up and stop arguing for independence. They didn't say, well, let's compromise our core value with the Labour parties because they seem to be winning elections. They made sustained arguments for what they believed, and they gradually moved the needle. They gradually moved the needle over a decade, and that's what we need to do. There's no shortcut to this other than sustained arguments for our values. But to do that, we need to actually support our members and activists to make those arguments, and we don't do that at the moment.
Yeah. So if you're joining us, it's very wet here in Neilston, but we're just chatting with Blair about COVID-19. We're also just talking about the Labour Party. It's a party that we both have invested a lot of love and time and energy into, and will continue to do that going forward.
Scars on our back.
Indeed. Maybe a couple of words then on how you think Keir Starmer's doing as our new leader.
So I didn't give Keir my first preference, because there was a few things he did during the contest that I thought felt a little bit kind of lowest common denominator in terms of reaching the internal electorate. Very happy to be proven wrong so far.
Absolutely.
Very, very happy to be proven wrong. He's shown, I think, a determination to sort of insert some decency back into the Labour Party around the question of anti-Semitism. I think, Rebecca Long-Bailey was probably made an example of, but there was a reason she had to be, because we have, as you know from working with the local Jewish community here in East Renfrewshire, we completely lost all trust from them, and it does take grand gestures like that to begin to win that back. I think he has shown. I think he's begun to build a brand of being the grown-up in the room. And I think if you look kind of over the other side of the Atlantic, that's kind of Joe Biden's approach at the moment.
Yeah,
it's just kind of saying to
absolutely.
people, remember when politics wasn't completely crazy? Remember when you had people in government who you maybe didn't like, maybe thought were failing sometimes, but they were at least trying to govern, And I think that positioning that he has of being the grown-up in the room is really interesting. I think the challenge for him in taking on some of these questions of the kind of post-COVID recovery is to root some of these questions about the size of the state in people's lived experience rather than ideology. Because if he, as much as we might agree with that, if he roots it in ideology, he will sound like we've sounded in the last few years, when people thought we were offering too much, thought we were unrealistic. So you've got to say we need localised employment support schemes, because the alternative is that people will feel they have to go to work and they'll spread the disease, and that recovery will take longer. Rather than talking about neoliberalism and state intervention and things like that, we need to root everything we talk about in the things that people are worried about at the moment.
Absolutely.
But I think he's doing. I feel like a weight has been lifted off my shoulder.
That's good.
In recent weeks.
Okay. It is pouring with rain here, so I'm not going to detain Blair too much longer for fear of drowning my guest in this lovely Scottish weather we're having. But I think a couple of just final questions. I suppose you ran Better Together. We lived that campaign together as well. I mean, where do you think we are in terms of 2014? Looking back on that and looking to where we are now and where the debate is now. What's next, particularly in the COVID context for that debate?
So, I think depressingly we'll be back into that debate before too long. I think it's inevitable for internal pressures within the SNP that Nicola Sturgeon will have to force the issue at the 2021 elections. So, in terms of where the debate is, there's been lots of focus on what has changed in terms of changed in favour, if you like, of the nationalist argument. So they would argue that Boris Johnson, unfortunately, being Prime Minister, has increased the political case for independence. They would argue that Brexit has damaged the pro-union argument about financial security and being part of something bigger. And that's all that's been in focus so far. What hasn't been in focus on the other side of the argument is actually that Brexit makes independence more risky, not less risky. Because the entire economic case for independence was predicated on the idea that we would continue to be in a single market of sorts with the rest of the UK. That's now gone.
Yeah.
And you can see that being acknowledged in the SNP's language, where they're acknowledging that there may be some form of harder border. They're talking in terms of a long economic transition, and they use euphemisms that are about kind of covering up what the economic pain would be. And I do think there's a powerful argument which says Skexit, piled on top of Brexit, is pouring fuel on a fire. Now, the problem for our side of the argument is that if the Conservatives make that argument, they will rightly be called hypocrites because they are pursuing a nationalist agenda around Brexit. So it is once again up to us, as it was for myself, for Alistair Darling in 2014, and Gordon Brown, to make that argument from a social democratic internationalist point of view, because that's ultimately where the Scottish people are. And underneath those binary opinion polls, so Progress Scotland, the sort of polling outfit that Angus Robertson set up, did the same sort of polling we did in Better Together, where you ask people on a sliding scale how strongly they feel about independence. And although there's been churn within those groups, it was exactly the same as our internal polling was in 2012, 2011. So there is everything to play for in that debate. But I'd love nothing more if we didn't have that debate.
I mean,
if we talked about schools and hospitals and poverty and jobs.
I was absolutely just thinking that, Blair, which is I long for the day that we all, and actually in this COVID scenario, we've seen the best of Nicola Sturgeon some days, and we've seen the best of
a great communicator.
You know, and I just think if we spent all of our time and energy and resource and talent in this country talking about health and education and the economy, then we would be in a much better place.
And this is the thing: if Brexit teaches us one thing, so British politics argued about Brexit for a decade, and it took up so much bandwidth. It was constantly in there through the guise of the immigration debate on Question Time and all the rest of it. If that teaches us anything, it's that doesn't end when nationalism wins. You've then got a decade of unpicking that union, unstitching those economic links, trying to work out how to manage the economic damage. And that's the thing, we've had a decade of talking about nothing else than this in Scottish politics.
Yep.
We will have, if we continue with this, at least another decade of continuing to talk about this, rather than talking about why our schools are declining, why our health service isn't performing, why children are living in poverty. And those are the things we need to talk about.
Absolutely.
We can't have a quarter of a century of talking about nothing else other than the Constitution and letting everything else fall to the wayside. But that's our fault. We need to be better.
Absolutely.
We need to be better. Absolutely. That's the only way that gets fixed.
Absolutely. So if you're just joining, we're just in the closing moments of Paul's Garden Gab today with Blair. Tell me, Blair, we were talking a wee bit there earlier off camera about how you've been supporting your children by becoming a teacher in the home. Do you like Mr. McDougall as a teacher? Is he any good?
You'd have to ask me. I'm probably more strict during homeschooling than I am more generally. I've really enjoyed it. One of the things, so I travel a lot for work and to sort of developing countries. But one of the things I like about the job that I do is the rest of the time I get to work from home, and so I'm always picking the kids up from school, making them dinner, and I get to spend a lot of time with them. What I realise is that normally, actually, though, I'm cycling back from school with them, I'm making them dinner, then we're going to a class, then I'm putting them to bed. You don't have long periods in the day where you actually have conversations with your children.
Yeah.
And that's just been brilliant. It sounds ridiculous, particularly for someone who is kind of maybe 2/3 full-time dad kind of thing. It sounds ridiculous to talk about getting to know your children better, but I think that's been one of the absolute best things about this.
Okay.
Notwithstanding my worries that I have completely failed them and condemned them to a generation of a lifetime of underachievement. So
I'm definitely going to ask Peggy and Gus when I see them next what they think of Mr. McDougall. Maybe a bit of a report card. So thank you for being with us today, Blair. I mean, just to finish off, what's your one big takeaway from all of this? I mean, what would you love? We talked a bit about trying to bottle that sense of community, trying to keep some of the things we've learned, but what's your one big takeaway if you had to choose one?
There's a line. So I studied and failed to finish philosophy at university. One of the one of the only things that really stuck in my head from that, because I spent most of the time leafleting and knocking on doors, was a line from Thomas Paine where he talks about revolutions, and he says in revolutions, I paraphrase, there's a genius in human beings that comes out. And he says there's a massive sense in people that can create change, and the job of government is to unlock that. I think we've seen in the last few weeks and months that people are kind of willing to go on that journey. People are willing to be part of something bigger, part of bigger change. They're willing to give their consent and support to big revolutionary action by government. And my takeaway has got to be, whether it's at the community level, if you've been delivering prescriptions to that old person, keep knocking on that old person's door to see every now and then to see if they're all right. If you are in government nationally, don't slide back into old arguments. Use the open door that's there to achieve something bigger, and to show to ignite that massive sense that Thomas Paine talked about, because people are willing and ready to do it, and this is a moment. And we kind of talked in these terms after the financial crisis. We said this is going to be social democracy's moment. This is the moment for state action, and we talked about it so much that we forgot to make it happen. We didn't have a plan for it, and as Labour people, we've got to make sure that we have a plan to do that.
Absolutely.
That's maybe more of a job for Keir Starmer than us. But
indeed,
but we've all got a job to do.
I think fantastic ambition, Blair, and I think I agree wholeheartedly with that, and we need to try and keep that sense.
Mm-hmm.
I see a couple of comments there, just praising you, Blair, saying when you see you back active locally. You see more.
Never stop.
He didn't ever stop, but I think more of Blair is always a good thing. And John McCafferty there in Eaglesham. Hi, John. How you doing?
Hi, John.
Just saying that it was a first-class local debating session. So there we go. More of this, definitely. So from a very wet Neilston, thank you very much for tuning in. Next week, I'm going to be really focusing on those small businesses that I was talking about, and I'm going to get out and about and get a chance to hopefully talk to some businesses that have been opening back up for the first time since COVID, and taking people on a wee bit of a tour around some of the places and just seeing how things are going, really. Blair, thank you very much for coming today. Thank you for getting wet in my garden. I feel terrible.
One from my hospital bed when
yeah. If he gets pneumonia, it's all my fault, of course. And I think I definitely owe him a pint now on a sunny day in a beer garden once that is possible. But listen, everyone, thank you very much. Remember to stick to all the rules and guidance until next time. And we will catch up on the Garden Gab next week. So please keep an eye on the Facebook and tune in. Take care. Bye-bye.